The stars hung in the vast emptiness of space, cold and distant, their light scattered like ancient jewels across the endless void. Amid this cosmic stillness, a golden leviathan moved with deliberate grace, a Dominion flagship named Sovereign. Its immense hull gleamed like polished metal, catching the faint glimmers of faraway suns. The ship exuded an aura of invincibility, its surface unmarred by battle, its design a masterpiece of both elegance and menace. It was the crown jewel of the Dominion's fleet, a symbol of their unchallenged power. On the bridge of the Sovereign, Supreme Commander Varrak stood like a statue carved from obsidian, his crystalline armor refracting the soft blue glow of the control panels around him. His presence was commanding, his very posture radiating authority. The faint hum of the ship's systems filled the air, a low, steady rhythm that seemed to echo Varrak's own calm yet unyielding demeanor. His violet eyes, sharp and calculating, gazed out of the massive viewport before him, where the stars stretched endlessly. Somewhere, hidden among those distant points of light, was their destination, a small, unassuming planet called Earth. How long until we reach this Earth? Varrak's voice was sharp, cutting through the quiet hum of the bridge. It carried the weight of command, a tone that brooked no hesitation. Lieutenant Zell, his loyal aide, stood at a nearby console. His pale, almost translucent skin glowed faintly in the dim light as his slender fingers danced across the holographic controls. A shimmering map of the solar system hovered in the air before him, its delicate lines tracing the positions of planets and moons. "Approximately 2 hours, Commander," Zell replied, his voice measured and precise. He glanced toward Varrak, his expression one of quiet confidence. "Our reconnaissance drones have already completed their scans of the planet. Their technological capabilities are primitive, at best. Their defenses are laughable." A faint smirk tugged at the corner of Varrak's lips, though his eyes remained cold. "Good," he said, his voice low, almost a growl. "Prepare the fleet for a standard intimidation display. Let these primitives understand the might of the Dominion." Zell nodded, his hands moving swiftly to relay the order. Behind the Sovereign, the rest of the Dominion fleet began to shift into formation. 25 warships, each one a marvel of engineering and destruction, aligned themselves with perfect precision. Their sleek, predatory designs seemed to cut through the darkness of space, their hulls glowing faintly with the energy of their charged weapons. From a distance, the fleet looked like a school of deadly creatures swimming in a silent, black ocean. Each ship was a testament to the Dominion's philosophy of power and control, sleek, efficient, and utterly lethal. The Sovereign led the formation, its massive size dwarfing even the largest of its escorts. Together, they moved as one, a single, unstoppable force bearing down on their unsuspecting target. Varrak's gaze remained fixed on the viewport, his mind already imagining the scene that would unfold when they arrived. He could picture the humans' fear, their confusion as they looked to the skies and saw the Dominion's fleet descending upon them. He imagined their futile attempts to resist, their primitive weapons proving useless against the Dominion's superior technology. It would be quick, decisive, and absolute, just as every conquest before had been. But even as he reveled in the certainty of victory, a faint unease stirred in the back of his mind. It was a fleeting sensation, so subtle that he almost dismissed it entirely. After all, no species had ever withstood the Dominion's might. Why should this Earth be any different? Still, the stars outside seemed to shimmer just a little more brightly, as if they were watching, waiting. Deep beneath the surface of Earth, hidden from the prying eyes of the stars, the Unified Defense Command bunker hummed with tense energy. The air was heavy, thick with the scent of metal and ozone from countless machines working tirelessly. The dim light cast long shadows across the cold, gray walls, where rows of monitors flickered with ominous images, blurry shapes of massive ships moving steadily closer through the void of space. At the center of the room stood General Elias, a man whose presence commanded silence. His face, weathered by years of service, was like a map of battles fought and decisions made under immense pressure. Lines etched deep into his skin spoke of sleepless nights and burdens carried for the safety of his people. Though his expression was calm, his sharp, piercing eyes betrayed a storm of thoughts raging beneath the surface. He stared at the largest screen, where the alien fleet loomed like a swarm of shadows against the backdrop of space. The room was alive with activity officers rushing between stations, hushed voices exchanging urgent updates, the constant beeping of alerts echoing in the background. Yet amidst the chaos, Elias remained unmoving, his hands clasped tightly behind his back. He leaned forward slightly, his gaze unyielding as if he could will the alien ships to stop with sheer determination. Finally, he spoke, his voice low but steady, carrying the weight of authority. "Unidentified vessels, this is Earth Defense Command," he said, his tone calm yet firm, like the stillness before a storm. "You are entering restricted space. Identify yourselves immediately." The words hung in the air, heavy and unbroken, as the room fell into a tense silence. The officers around him paused, their eyes flicking toward the general, waiting for a response that would decide the fate of their world. Far above, aboard the Sovereign, Supreme Commander Varek stood tall, his imposing figure framed by the vastness of space beyond the bridge's viewport. His crystalline armor seemed to pulse faintly, catching the dim light and refracting it into a cold, spectral glow. He stepped forward, his boots echoing against the polished floor, each step deliberate and full of purpose. "This is Supreme Commander Varek of the Galactic Dominion," he declared, his voice a deep, resonant growl that filled the air like the rumble of distant thunder. There was no hesitation, no room for compromise in his tone. "Your planet has been chosen to join our empire. Submit peacefully, or face annihilation." His words carried a chilling finality, as if the outcome had already been decided. The crew around him worked in silence, their movements precise and mechanical, their faces devoid of emotion. They had heard this speech before, seen countless worlds fall under the Dominion's shadow. To them, this was just another conquest, another planet to be assimilated into their ever-expanding empire. But back on Earth, General Elias's expression did not waver. He straightened his posture, his shoulders squared as he responded. "Earth does not submit," he said, his voice unwavering, each word sharp and deliberate. "If you come in peace, we welcome dialogue. But if you come to conquer, know that we will resist." The room around him seemed to hold its breath. The officers exchanged nervous glances, their hands hovering over controls, ready for the worst. Yet Elias's calm demeanor was like an anchor, grounding them amidst the rising tide of fear. On the Sovereign, Lieutenant Zell stood beside Varek, his thin lips curling into a sneer as he studied the data streaming across his console. The humans' orbital defenses were laughable outdated satellites, crude space stations, and a scattering of primitive weaponry that seemed more like relics than tools of war. "They dare to resist us with this junk," Zell muttered, his voice dripping with disdain. His translucent fingers hovered over the holographic display, highlighting the pitiful state of Earth's defenses. To him, it was absurd, insulting even that such a backward species would stand against the might of the Dominion. Varek chuckled, a low, dark sound that reverberated through the bridge. His violet eyes narrowed as he stared at the image of Earth on the main screen, a small blue and green orb suspended in the void. "Foolish," he murmured, almost to himself. But perhaps not entirely unexpected. Yet, as he spoke, a flicker of unease passed through him, a sensation so faint that he almost dismissed it. These humans were different. Most species crumbled at the mere sight of the Dominion fleet, their leaders groveling for mercy before the first shot was even fired. But these humans, they stood defiant. Their voices did not tremble. Their words did not falter. For the first time in a long while, Varek felt something he could not quite name. It was not fear, no, fear was beneath him. But there was a sense of unpredictability, a faint whisper at the edge of his thoughts that refused to be ignored. He turned to Zell, his expression hardening. "Prepare the fleet," he ordered, his voice cutting through the air like a blade. "If they wish to resist, we will show them what resistance brings." As the Dominion fleet continued its relentless approach, the stars seemed to dim, their light swallowed by the growing shadow of the Sovereign and its escorts. On Earth, General Elias stood firm, his gaze unwavering as he stared at the screen. In that moment, two forces, one vast and ancient, the other small but unyielding, prepared to collide. And though the outcome seemed inevitable, there was something in the air, an invisible tension that hinted at the unexpected. The universe held its breath. The Dominion fleet glided closer to Earth, their golden hulls shimmering faintly against the dark void, like predators stalking an unknowing prey. The planet hung before them, a fragile sphere of blue and green, its surface veiled by swirling clouds. It seemed serene, defenseless, a world ripe for conquest. As they neared, one of the smaller Dominion scout ships broke away from the formation. Sleek and agile, it moved with silent precision, descending toward the planet's orbit to begin its scans. Its purpose was simple: to analyze the surface, assess the strength of Earth's defenses, and confirm what the Dominion already believed, that resistance would be futile. On the Sovereign's bridge, Lieutenant Zell watched the scouts progress through a holographic display. His pale fingers tapped idly against the console, his expression one of boredom. "Such a waste of time," he muttered, his voice tinged with disdain. "These primitives can barely leave their own atmosphere. What could they possibly hide?" Supreme Commander Varek stood nearby, his tall, imposing frame casting a long shadow over the crew. He remained silent, his violet eyes fixed on the viewport where Earth loomed ever larger. Though he shared Zell's confidence, a faint unease still lingered in the back of his mind. The scout ship moved closer, its sensors sweeping the planet below. But then, something unexpected happened. From the shadows of Earth's orbit, a small vessel emerged, a boxy, unassuming craft that looked more like a relic than a threat. Its movements were erratic, almost clumsy, yet it accelerated with startling speed, heading straight for the Dominion scout. "What is that?" Zell spat, leaning forward to get a better view. His tone was thick with contempt, but there was a flicker of confusion in his eyes. The human ship was unlike anything in the Dominion's extensive database, its design crude and outdated. Yet it moved with purpose, like an insect darting toward a predator. The bridge crew watched in silence as the human vessel closed the distance. There was no warning, no attempt at communication. It simply latched onto the Dominion scout, clinging to its hull like a parasite. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, without warning, a blinding flash of light erupted from the scout ship, flooding the Dominion's sensors with static. The bridge of the Sovereign was thrown into chaos. Alarms blared, holographic displays flickered and distorted, and the crews scrambled to regain control of their systems. Varek's eyes narrowed as he turned to the main screen, where the scout ship now drifted lifelessly, its once brilliant hull dim and cold. "Impossible!" Varek growled, his voice a thunderous roar that silenced the chaos around him. He stepped closer to the screen, his crystalline armor glinting in the dim light. "What happened?" The Dominion's chief scientist, a stooped figure with a face lined by centuries of knowledge, moved quickly to answer. His hands trembled slightly as he adjusted the controls, analyzing the data streaming in from the disabled scout. "An electromagnetic pulse," the scientist reported, his voice wavering with a mix of shock and disbelief. "Crude, but devastatingly effective. It overloaded the scouts' systems, rendering them completely inoperable. Verak's fists clenched at his sides, the crystalline plates of his armor grinding softly against one another. He could feel the eyes of his crew on him, their unspoken questions hanging heavy in the air. No species had ever disabled a Dominion vessel during first contact. Not once in the Dominion's long history of conquest. These humans, Verak muttered, his voice low and dangerous. They are more dangerous than they appear? Zal's sneer faltered, replaced by a look of uncertainty. He turned back to his console, his fingers moving rapidly as he scanned for further threats. It's a fluke, he said, though his tone lacked conviction. A lucky strike from a desperate species. They cannot hope to challenge us. But Verak wasn't so sure. He stared at the drifting scout ship, its lifeless form a stark reminder that the Dominion's supremacy was not as absolute as they had believed. The humans had struck first, not with fear or desperation, but with calculated precision. It was a bold move, reckless, perhaps, but undeniably effective. For the first time, Verak felt the weight of uncertainty pressing against him. These humans were unlike any species he had encountered before. They were unpredictable, resourceful, and, above all, unafraid. The bridge fell into a tense silence as the crew awaited Verak's next command. Outside, the stars seemed to watch, their cold light reflecting off the Dominion fleet as it hung motionless in space. The humans had made their move, and the Dominion's carefully laid plans had been disrupted. Verak's jaw tightened as he turned to Zal. "Prepare the fleet for immediate retaliation," he ordered, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "If these humans wish to challenge us, we will show them the true power of the Dominion." But even as he spoke, a shadow of doubt lingered in his mind. The humans had already proven that they were not to be underestimated. And if they were capable of disabling a Dominion ship, what else might they be hiding? The stars outside seemed to shimmer faintly, as if they too were holding their breath, waiting to see what would come next. The Dominion's outermost territories stretched across the void like a vast, impenetrable web, their borders patrolled by fleets of sleek, menacing vessels. For centuries, no enemy had dared to challenge this domain, no outsider bold enough to cross into their space uninvited. Yet now, the silence of the stars was broken by the arrival of something unexpected, something impossible. The Resolute emerged from the blackness of space like a leviathan rising from the depths. Its enormous frame was unlike anything the Dominion had ever encountered. It was not elegant or streamlined like their own ships. No, this was a war machine built for endurance and survival. Its blocky, angular design exuded a brutal practicality, the thick armor plating glinting faintly in the starlight. Massive engines burned with a steady, determined glow, propelling the vessel forward with unrelenting purpose. The Resolute was a testament to human ingenuity and resilience. Its hull bristled with visible weaponry, and its redundant systems were exposed in a way that seemed almost crude, but there was a subtle brilliance to the design. Every inch of the ship spoke of a species that had learned to adapt, to overcome, and to survive against impossible odds. Aboard the Dominion battlecruiser Eclipse, Captain Zorik stood frozen, his golden eyes fixed on the data feed streaming across the main console. The Dominion bridge, usually a place of calm efficiency, was now filled with murmurs of disbelief. Officers exchanged uneasy glances, their confidence shaken by what they were seeing. "That can't be a human warship," Zorik muttered, his voice low and edged with incredulity. He leaned closer to the display, as if proximity might somehow make the image make sense. How did they build something like this? The question hung in the air, unanswered. The Dominion had always viewed humanity as a primitive, insignificant species, barely worth their attention. Yet here was proof that the humans were far more capable and far more dangerous than anyone had anticipated. The Resolute continued its steady approach, its presence an unspoken challenge to the Dominion fleet. The silence was oppressive, the tension on the Eclipse bridge growing with every passing second. Then, without warning, a signal came through a hail from the human ship. The Dominion crew hesitated, their fingers hovering over the controls. Finally, Zorik gave a curt nod, and the screen flickered to life. Captain Adrian of the Resolute appeared, his image sharp and clear against the backdrop of his ship's command center. He was a man of middle years, his face lined with the marks of experience. His uniform, though simple, was worn with a quiet dignity. But it was his expression that drew the most attention, calm, confident, and utterly unafraid. "This is Captain Adrian of the Earth vessel Resolute," he said, his voice steady and measured. There was no arrogance in his tone, no bravado, only a quiet strength that carried far more weight. "We seek peaceful dialogue with the Dominion." The bridge of the Eclipse fell into an uneasy silence. Zorik narrowed his eyes, his lips pressing into a thin line as he studied the human captain. There was something unsettling about this man, something in the way he carried himself. Adrian was not groveling or pleading for mercy, as so many had before him. Instead, he spoke as an equal, as if Earth had every right to stand before the Dominion and demand to be heard. "Peace?" Zorik repeated, his voice laced with skepticism. He gestured toward the display, where the Resolute loomed like a fortress in the void. "With a warship like that?" Adrian's expression didn't waver. If he was insulted by Zorik's tone, he didn't show it. Instead, he leaned forward slightly, his gaze steady and unflinching. "The Resolute was not built for conquest," he said. "It was built for survival. For too long, humanity has faced threats from forces far greater than ourselves. We learned to adapt, to endure. And now, we stand before you not as conquerors, but as survivors seeking a path forward that doesn't end in destruction." Zorik's jaw tightened, his mind racing. The words were carefully chosen, delivered with precision. Adrian was offering peace, but the Resolute itself spoke of war. It was a weapon, a declaration that humanity would not bow to the Dominion's will. The Dominion captain turned to his officers, his voice a sharp command. "Scan their ship. I want to know everything about it, its weapons, its defenses, its weaknesses." The crew obeyed, their fingers flying over the controls. Yet as the scans came back, their faces grew pale. The Resolute was unlike anything they had ever encountered. Its armor was layered and reinforced, designed to withstand even the most advanced weaponry. Its systems were redundant and self-sufficient, ensuring that no single failure could cripple the ship. And its weapons, though primitive by Dominion standards, they were powerful, devastatingly so. "It's a fortress," one of the officers murmured, his voice barely audible. "A fortress built to fight giants." Zorik's hands clenched into fists. He turned back to Adrian, his golden eyes narrowing. "You speak of peace," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "But your ship tells a different story. Why should we trust you, human?" Adrian's gaze didn't falter. "Because we are not here to fight," he said simply. "But make no mistake, if you force our hand, we will defend ourselves. The Resolute is proof of that." For a moment, the two captains stared at each other, the silence between them heavy with unspoken tension. Outside, the stars seemed to dim, their light swallowed by the shadow of the Resolute. It was a ship that defied expectation, a symbol of humanity's resilience and determination. And though Zorik would never admit it, a flicker of doubt crept into his mind. These humans were not the weak, insignificant creatures the Dominion had believed them to be. They were something far more dangerous, something that could not be easily crushed or controlled. The Resolute waited, its engines humming softly as it held its position. And in that moment, the balance of power shifted, ever so slightly, as the Dominion was forced to confront a truth they had long ignored: humanity was no longer a species to be underestimated. The void of space trembled with anticipation as the Dominion fleet advanced, their 20 warships cutting through the darkness like blades of light. Each ship was a masterpiece of destructive power, their sleek forms humming with energy, their weapons systems primed and ready. At the center of the formation loomed the Sovereign, the flagship of Supreme Commander Varak, its golden hull glinting like a predator's eye. Varak stood on the bridge of the Sovereign, his imposing figure wrapped in crystalline armor that seemed to pulse faintly with his every movement. His violet eyes burned with cold determination as he gazed at the distant shape of the Resolute, the human warship that dared to challenge Dominion supremacy. "Destroy their engines," Varak commanded, his voice sharp and unyielding. It was not a request, it was an inevitability. "We'll show them the futility of resistance." The order was relayed, and the Dominion fleet moved as one, their weapons systems locking onto the Resolute. A moment later, the void erupted in a symphony of destruction. Beams of pure energy streaked across the blackness, their brilliance illuminating the surrounding space. The Dominion's attack was precise, overwhelming, and utterly relentless. But something was wrong. As the energy beams neared the Resolute, they began to bend, their trajectories warping in impossible ways. What should have been a direct and devastating strike instead dissipated harmlessly into the void, the beams scattering like sunlight through a prism. The Resolute remained untouched, its massive frame steady and unmoving, like a mountain weathering a storm. Varak's eyes narrowed, his jaw tightening as a flicker of confusion crossed his face. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice a growl of frustration. The Dominion's science officer, a wiry figure with a perpetually furrowed brow, worked furiously at his console. His hands trembled as he analyzed the data, his expression shifting from confusion to disbelief. "Gravitational shielding," the officer finally reported, his voice barely above a whisper. "They are bending space itself to redirect our attacks. The energy is being scattered, absorbed into the folds of space before it can reach them." For a moment, the bridge of the Sovereign was silent, the weight of the revelation pressing down on everyone present. Gravitational shielding was a theoretical concept, something the Dominion had considered but dismissed as impractical, even impossible. Yet here it was, wielded by a species they had deemed primitive. Varak's fists clenched, his crystalline armor grinding softly as he struggled to contain his fury. "Impossible," he muttered, though the evidence was undeniable. These humans, these upstarts, had achieved what the Dominion had not. Before he could issue a new command, the Resolute struck back. From its armored hull, small projectiles were launched, tiny, almost insignificant compared to the Dominion's energy weapons. But these projectiles moved with terrifying speed, accelerated to near-light velocity. They tore through the void like meteors, their paths straight and unyielding. The first projectile struck one of the Dominion warships, piercing its elegant hull with brutal efficiency. The ship shuddered, its shields flaring uselessly as the kinetic force ripped through its core. A moment later, it was drifting, lifeless and broken, its once proud form reduced to debris. Then another Dominion ship fell. And another. The Resolute's retaliation was methodical, each shot precise and devastating. The Dominion's energy shields, designed to deflect plasma and beam weapons, were utterly ineffective against the physical impacts. The projectiles punched through them as if they weren't there, shattering hulls and disabling systems with terrifying ease. On the bridge of the Sovereign, Varak watched in stunned silence as his fleet was systematically dismantled. The Resolute moved with the calm confidence of a predator, its every action deliberate and controlled. "How are they doing this?" one of the officers whispered, his voice trembling. "They've adapted," the science officer replied, his tone grim. Their weapons are simple, but effective. They've found the weaknesses in our defenses and exploited them. Varrac's fury boiled over, his voice echoing across the bridge like a thunderclap. Enough. Focus all firepower on that ship. Overwhelm their shielding. The Dominion fleet regrouped, their remaining ships forming a tight formation as they unleashed another barrage of energy weapons. The void lit up once more, the combined firepower of the Dominion fleet converging on the Resolute. But the human warship held firm. Its gravitational shielding absorbed the onslaught, the space around it shimmering like a heat haze as the energy was redirected harmlessly away. The Resolute seemed almost untouchable, an immovable object standing against the Dominion's might. And then it struck again. More projectiles launched from the Resolute, their trajectories as unerring as before. One by one, the Dominion ships fell, their elegant forms shattered by the relentless assault. The void was filled with the debris of war, the remnants of the once mighty Dominion fleet drifting aimlessly. On the bridge of the Sovereign, Varrac stood rigid, his hands gripping the edge of the console so tightly that the crystalline surface cracked beneath his fingers. His pride, his fleet, his very belief in the Dominion's invincibility, everything was crumbling before him. These humans, he muttered, his voice low and filled with a dangerous mix of anger and awe. They are not just fighting back. They are winning. The Resolute loomed in the distance, its engines burning steadily as it held its position. It was not chasing the Dominion ships, not pressing its advantage. It simply waited, its presence a silent declaration of defiance. For the first time in his long and storied career, Varrac felt the sting of doubt. The Dominion had always been the conqueror, the unchallenged master of the stars. But now, they faced an enemy unlike any other, an enemy that refused to bow, that fought with ingenuity and determination. The Resolute was more than a warship. It was a symbol of humanity's resilience, a testament to their refusal to be broken. And as the Dominion fleet retreated, their pride shattered, one thing became clear: the age of Dominion dominance was no longer certain. The aftermath of the battle hung heavy in the void of space. The debris of shattered Dominion warships drifted aimlessly, their once pristine forms now broken and lifeless. The silence was deafening, a stark contrast to the chaos that had erupted only moments before. And at the center of it all, the Resolute stood unscathed, its presence a quiet but undeniable statement of defiance. On the bridge of the Resolute, Captain Adrian stood with his hands clasped behind his back, his gaze fixed on the image of the Sovereign displayed on the main screen. The Dominion flagship, though still intact, bore the weight of defeat. Its golden hull, once a symbol of unyielding power, seemed duller now, its light dimmed by the humiliation of failure. Adrian's expression was calm, his features composed. There was no triumph in his eyes, no arrogance in his demeanor. Despite the overwhelming victory, he carried himself with a quiet dignity, as if the battle had been a necessary burden rather than a conquest. "Open a channel to the Sovereign," Adrian said, his voice steady and deliberate. The communication link was established, and the image of Supreme Commander Varrac appeared on the screen. The Dominion leader's face was a mask of barely contained fury, his violet eyes blazing with anger and frustration. His crystalline armor, once gleaming with an aura of invincibility, now seemed tarnished, its brilliance dulled by the weight of his defeat. Adrian inclined his head slightly, a gesture of respect that was neither submissive nor condescending. "Commander Varrac," he began, his tone measured and even. "I trust you understand now that humanity is not as weak as you once believed." Varrac's jaw tightened, his fists clenching at his sides. The air around him seemed to crackle with tension, his pride warring with the undeniable reality of the situation. For a moment, it seemed as though he might lash out, his anger boiling over. But then, he forced himself to speak, his voice low and sharp. "You've made your point, Human, Varrak growled. But do not mistake this for weakness. The Dominion does not forget such insults. Adrian's gaze did not waver. If he was intimidated by Varrak's words, he did not show it. Instead, he stepped closer to the screen, his expression softening slightly. "We don't seek war, Commander," Adrian said, his voice calm but firm. "But we will defend ourselves. Humanity has learned to survive through innovation and resilience. We've faced extinction, oppression, and forces far beyond our control. And yet, we've endured. Not through conquest, but through adaptation. Perhaps it's time for the Dominion to reconsider its approach." Varrak's eyes narrowed, his mind racing as he processed Adrian's words. The Dominion had always relied on its technological superiority, its ability to dominate and subjugate through sheer power. But these humans, they had taken a different path, one built on ingenuity and determination rather than brute force. And it worked. For centuries, the Dominion had viewed itself as the pinnacle of evolution, the rightful rulers of the stars. But now, as Varrak stood before this human captain, he felt the first stirrings of doubt. The Resolute was a testament to humanity's strength not in its weapons or its defenses, but in the philosophy that had built it. "You speak of peace," Varrak said, his voice laced with skepticism. "But your ship is a weapon of war. How can I trust your words when your actions speak otherwise?" Adrian's lips pressed into a thin line, his gaze steady and unflinching. "The Resolute was not built for conquest," he replied. "It was built for survival. Every piece of it, every system, every weapon, it exists because we had no other choice. We've been pushed to the brink time and time again, and each time, we've found a way to survive. That's what humanity does, Commander. We survive." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Adrian's voice was not filled with pride or arrogance, but with a quiet conviction that could not be ignored. It was the voice of a man who had seen his people suffer, who had fought to protect them against impossible odds. Varrak's anger began to cool, replaced by a deep, simmering unease. He had always believed the Dominion to be unassailable, its power unmatched. But now, as he looked into the eyes of this human captain, he saw something he had never expected, the strength of a species that refused to be broken. "You believe you can challenge the Dominion?" Varrak asked, his tone softer now, though still tinged with disbelief. "You think your resilience is enough to stand against us?" Adrian's expression did not change. "We don't want to challenge you," he said simply. "We want to coexist. But if you force us to fight, we will. And as you've seen, we are not so easily defeated." The silence that followed was deafening, the weight of Adrian's words pressing down on everyone present. Varrak's mind churned, his thoughts a whirlwind of anger, doubt, and reluctant admiration. The Dominion had always seen itself as invincible, its rule unchallenged. But now, for the first time, that certainty was beginning to crack. Finally, Varrak spoke, his voice low and measured. "You have given me much to consider, Captain Adrian. But do not mistake my hesitation for agreement. The Dominion does not change easily." Adrian nodded, his expression unreadable. "I wouldn't expect it to," he said. "But change is inevitable, Commander. It's the only way to survive." With that, the communication link was severed, leaving Varrak alone on the bridge of the Sovereign. He stared at the empty screen, his thoughts heavy and conflicted. The battle had been lost, but the war was far from over. And yet, as Varrak gazed out at the distant shape of the Resolute, he could not shake the feeling that humanity was more than just a passing threat. They were a force to be reckoned with, a force that might one day change the very fabric of the galaxy. The aftermath of the battle hung heavy in the void of space. The debris of shattered Dominion warships drifted aimlessly, their once pristine forms now broken and lifeless. The silence was deafening, a stark contrast to the chaos that had erupted only moments before. And at the center of it all, the Resolute stood unscathed, its presence a quiet but undeniable statement of defiance. On the bridge of the Resolute, Captain Adrian stood with his hands clasped behind his back, his gaze fixed on the image of the Sovereign displayed on the main screen. The Dominion flagship, though still intact, bore the weight of defeat. Its golden hull, once a symbol of unyielding power, seemed duller now, its light dimmed by the humiliation of failure. Adrian's expression was calm, his features composed. There was no triumph in his eyes, no arrogance in his demeanor. Despite the overwhelming victory, he carried himself with a quiet dignity, as if the battle had been a necessary burden rather than a conquest. "Open a channel to the Sovereign," Adrian said, his voice steady and deliberate. The communication link was established, and the image of Supreme Commander Varek appeared on the screen. The Dominion leader's face was a mask of barely contained fury, his violet eyes blazing with anger and frustration. His crystalline armor, once gleaming with an aura of invincibility, now seemed tarnished, its brilliance dulled by the weight of his defeat. Adrian inclined his head slightly, a gesture of respect that was neither submissive nor condescending. "Commander Varek," he began, his tone measured and even. "I trust you understand now that humanity is not as weak as you once believed." Varek's jaw tightened, his fists clenching at his sides. The air around him seemed to crackle with tension, his pride warring with the undeniable reality of the situation. For a moment, it seemed as though he might lash out, his anger boiling over. But then, he forced himself to speak, his voice low and sharp. "You've made your point, human," Varek growled. "But do not mistake this for weakness. The Dominion does not forget such insults." Adrian's gaze did not waver. If he was intimidated by Varek's words, he did not show it. Instead, he stepped closer to the screen, his expression softening slightly. "We don't seek war, Commander," Adrian said, his voice calm but firm. "But we will defend ourselves. Humanity has learned to survive through innovation and resilience. We've faced extinction, oppression, and forces far beyond our control. And yet, we've endured. Not through conquest, but through adaptation. Perhaps it's time for the Dominion to reconsider its approach." Varek's eyes narrowed, his mind racing as he processed Adrian's words. The Dominion had always relied on its technological superiority, its ability to dominate and subjugate through sheer power. But these humans, they had taken a different path, one built on ingenuity and determination rather than brute force. And it worked. For centuries, the Dominion had viewed itself as the pinnacle of evolution, the rightful rulers of the stars. But now, as Varek stood before this human captain, he felt the first stirrings of doubt. The Resolute was a testament to humanity's strength not in its weapons or its defenses, but in the philosophy that had built it. "You speak of peace," Varek said, his voice laced with skepticism. "But your ship is a weapon of war. How can I trust your words when your actions speak otherwise?" Adrian's lips pressed into a thin line, his gaze steady and unflinching. "The Resolute was not built for conquest," he replied. "It was built for survival. Every piece of it, every system, every weapon, it exists because we had no other choice. We've been pushed to the brink time and time again, and each time, we've found a way to survive. That's what humanity does, Commander. We survive." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Adrian's voice was not filled with pride or arrogance, but with a quiet conviction that could not be ignored. It was the voice of a man who had seen his people suffer, who had fought to protect them against impossible odds. Verak's anger began to cool, replaced by a deep, simmering unease. He had always believed the Dominion to be unassailable, its power unmatched. But now, as he looked into the eyes of this human captain, he saw something he had never expected, the strength of a species that refused to be broken. "You believe you can challenge the Dominion?" Verak asked, his tone softer now, though still tinged with disbelief. "You think your resilience is enough to stand against us?" Adrian's expression did not change. "We don't want to challenge you," he said simply. "We want to coexist. But if you force us to fight, we will. And as you've seen, we are not so easily defeated." The silence that followed was deafening, the weight of Adrian's words pressing down on everyone present. Verak's mind churned, his thoughts a whirlwind of anger, doubt, and reluctant admiration. The Dominion had always seen itself as invincible, its rule unchallenged. But now, for the first time, that certainty was beginning to crack. Finally, Verak spoke, his voice low and measured. "You have given me much to consider, Captain Adrian. But do not mistake my hesitation for agreement. The Dominion does not change easily." Adrian nodded, his expression unreadable. "I wouldn't expect it to," he said. "But change is inevitable, Commander. It's the only way to survive." With that, the communication link was severed, leaving Verak alone on the bridge of the Sovereign. He stared at the empty screen, his thoughts heavy and conflicted. The battle had been lost, but the war was far from over. And yet, as Verak gazed out at the distant shape of the Resolute, he could not shake the feeling that humanity was more than just a passing threat. They were a force to be reckoned with, a force that might one day change the very fabric of the galaxy. The Dominion capital was unlike anything Adrian or Dr. Myra had ever seen. It was a world carved from crystal and light, its cities rising like jagged towers of glass that shimmered in hues of violet and gold. The air itself seemed alive, humming faintly with the energy of the Dominion's ancient technologies. The Grand Council chamber, where the meeting was to take place, sat at the heart of this luminous world, a vast, cathedral-like structure that seemed to defy gravity, its spires reaching impossibly high into the sky. As Adrian and Myra stepped into the chamber, they were struck by its sheer scale. The walls were etched with intricate patterns that pulsed faintly, as if the very building was alive and listening. Rows of Dominion counselors sat in concentric circles, their crystalline robes catching the light and refracting it into a kaleidoscope of colors. At the far end of the chamber, seated on a raised throne of obsidian and light, was Emperor Kale himself, the ruler of the Dominion. His presence was commanding, his golden armor gleaming like liquid fire, his gaze sharp and piercing. Adrian, clad in the simple but dignified uniform of Earth's fleet, stood tall despite the imposing surroundings. Beside him, Dr. Myra carried herself with quiet confidence, her eyes keen and observant. Together, they were humanity's voice in this alien hall, two figures standing against the weight of millennia-old traditions. Adrian stepped forward, his voice steady as he began. "Honored counselors, Emperor Kale, I thank you for granting us this audience. We come not as conquerors or supplicants, but as equals seeking understanding." The chamber fell silent, the Dominion counselors watching him with expressions that ranged from curiosity to suspicion. Adrian could feel the weight of their scrutiny, but he pressed on, his tone calm and measured. "Humanity has fought long and hard to survive," he continued. "We have faced extinction, oppression, and the unknown. Through it all, we have learned one truth: survival is not enough. To truly thrive, we must build bridges, not walls. We propose a new path: recognition of humanity as an independent power, an end to forced assimilation, and the formation of a galactic coalition. Together, we can achieve more than we ever could alone. A murmur rippled through the council, the Dominion leaders exchanging glances. Some nodded thoughtfully, while others frowned, their crystalline features hardening with distrust. Dr. Myra stepped forward, her voice soft but firm. The Dominion has always been a beacon of technological refinement, she said, her eyes sweeping across the room. Your advancements in energy manipulation, your mastery of elegant design, these are achievements we respect deeply. But humanity has taken a different path. She paused, letting her words settle before continuing. Where you sought perfection, we sought practicality. Where you refined energy weapons, we perfected kinetic systems. While you built sleek and beautiful ships, we built fortresses strong, enduring, and reliable. Our philosophy is not one of elegance, but of resilience. We prioritize redundancy over beauty, reliability over efficiency. It is not a better way, nor a worse one. It is simply different. Her words hung in the air, a quiet challenge to the Dominion's sense of superiority. Some counselors leaned forward, intrigued. Others sat back, their expressions guarded. One of the counselors, a tall figure with a crown of crystalline spines, spoke sharply. You speak as though your crude methods are equal to our refinement, he said, his tone dripping with disdain. Your fortresses are an affront to the artistry of the stars. Myra met his gaze without flinching. Perhaps, she said evenly. But our fortresses have withstood your fleets. Our methods, crude as they may seem, have kept us alive. And survival, counselor, is the foundation of all progress. The chamber erupted into debate, voices rising in a cacophony of argument. Some counselors defended humanity's resilience, seeing it as a strength the Dominion could learn from. Others dismissed it as primitive, unworthy of consideration. At the head of the chamber, Emperor Kale watched in silence, his expression unreadable. His golden eyes flicked between Adrian and Myra, his mind a storm of thoughts. Finally, he raised a hand, and the room fell silent once more. You ask us to abandon millennia of tradition, Kale said, his voice deep and resonant, echoing through the chamber like the toll of a great bell. You ask us to reconsider everything we are, everything we have built. Do you understand what you are asking? Adrian stepped forward, his gaze steady. We're not asking you to abandon who you are, he said. We're asking you to evolve. To grow. Humanity has learned that survival depends on change. We've had to adapt to challenges we never imagined, to enemies we never expected. And each time, we've emerged stronger. Together, we can build something greater than either of us could alone. Kale's gaze bore into Adrian, his expression inscrutable. The chamber was silent, every eye fixed on the Emperor. Finally, Kale leaned back in his throne, his golden armor catching the light like a dying sun. You speak with conviction, Captain Adrian, he said. And your words carry weight. But the Dominion does not change easily. Tradition is not a chain, it is the foundation of our strength. Adrian nodded slowly. I understand, he said. Change is never easy. But stagnation is far more dangerous. The galaxy is vast, and the challenges we face are greater than any one species can overcome alone. Together, we can forge a future that honors both our traditions and our potential. Kale was silent for a long moment, his gaze distant as he considered Adrian's words. Around him, the counselors murmured softly, their voices a mix of agreement and dissent. The air was thick with tension, the weight of the decision pressing down on everyone in the chamber. Finally, Kale rose from his throne, his golden form towering over the room. You have given us much to consider, he said, his voice heavy with meaning. The path you propose is uncertain, and fraught with risk. But perhaps, it is a risk worth taking. Adrian inclined his head, his expression calm but resolute. Thank you, Emperor Kale. That is all we ask. As the meeting concluded, the tension in the room began to ease. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, there was a glimmer of hope, a chance for something greater than war, greater than conquest. A chance for unity. And in the vast, unyielding darkness of the galaxy, that glimmer was enough. The tension in the Dominion Council chamber had not eased in the days following the initial meeting. If anything, it had grown thicker, like a storm gathering on the horizon. Whispers of humanity's actions spread like wildfire through the crystalline halls of Dominion cities, carried by both fear and fascination. The humans were not retreating back to their distant blue world. They were advancing not with weapons drawn, but with a quiet, unnerving resolve that unsettled even the most steadfast Dominion leaders. In one of the Dominion's towering command centers, a high-ranking officer stood before a shimmering map of the galaxy. The holographic display cast an eerie glow across the room, illuminating the sharp, angular features of the Dominion commanders gathered around it. The officer's voice trembled slightly, though he tried to mask it with formality. Reports confirm that additional human ships have entered Dominion space, he began, gesturing toward several glowing markers scattered across key trade routes. They are smaller than the Resolute, but they are strategically positioned near critical points, trade hubs, resource outposts, and hyperspace lanes. The room fell silent. The Dominion commanders exchanged uneasy glances, their crystalline robes rustling faintly as they shifted in their seats. The ship's positions were no coincidence. Each one had been placed with precision, like chess pieces in a game where humanity was forcing the Dominion to play defense. They are not attacking, the officer continued, his voice quieter now. They are just watching. The word hung in the air, heavy with implication. Watching. Waiting. The humans had not fired a single shot, yet their presence alone was enough to send ripples of uncertainty through the Dominion's ranks. It was a move calculated not to provoke, but to demand attention, a silent declaration that humanity would no longer be ignored. In the Dominion's Grand Council chamber, the murmurs of debate grew louder with each passing day. Some counselors saw the human presence as a threat, a provocation that demanded immediate retaliation. Others argued that the humans' restraint was a sign of their sincerity, a demonstration of their desire for peace despite their readiness for war. This is a challenge, one counselor spat, his crystalline features sharp with anger. They are testing our resolve, daring us to act. We cannot allow this insult to stand. And yet they have not attacked, another countered, her voice calm but firm. They could have struck our trade routes, disrupted our supply lines, but they have not. Perhaps they are waiting for us to make the first move, to prove that we are the aggressors. The room erupted into argument, voices clashing like the echoes of distant thunder. At the center of it all sat Emperor Kale, silent and unmoving. His golden eyes flicked between the counselors, his expression unreadable as he listened to their heated words. He understood the humans' strategy all too well. They were forcing the Dominion to confront a truth it had long ignored: humanity was no longer a minor power to be dismissed. They were a force to be reckoned with, and they had made that clear without firing a single shot. Weeks passed, and the debates raged on, each day bringing new arguments and counter-arguments. The Dominion Council was divided, its members torn between fear of humanity's growing strength and curiosity about their unorthodox methods. The humans had proven their resilience, their ingenuity, but could they be trusted? Could their way truly coexist with the Dominion's ancient traditions? Finally, the day came when Emperor Kale summoned Captain Adrian and Dr. Myra to the council chamber once more. The air was heavy with anticipation as the two humans entered, their expressions calm but resolute. Adrian's uniform was crisp, his posture straight, while Myra's sharp eyes scanned the room, taking in every detail. They could feel the weight of the moment, the unspoken tension that filled the chamber like a coiled spring. Kale rose from his throne, his golden armor gleaming in the chamber's ethereal light. His presence was commanding, his voice deep and resonant as he addressed the room. After much deliberation, the council has reached a decision, he said, his words slow and deliberate. The Dominion will recognize Earth's sovereignty. Furthermore, we will begin discussions on the formation of a new galactic order, a coalition that acknowledges the strengths of all its members. A murmur rippled through the council, a mixture of shock and relief. Adrian inclined his head respectfully, his face calm but his eyes alight with quiet triumph. Myra's lips curved into a small, satisfied smile. It was a victory, but they both knew it was only the first step. Kale's gaze turned to Adrian, his golden eyes piercing. "This is only the beginning," he said, his voice heavy with meaning. "Your actions have forced us to reconsider many things, Captain Adrian. But words and gestures are not enough. You must prove that your way can work, that your philosophy of resilience and cooperation can endure the challenges ahead." Adrian met Kale's gaze without flinching. "We will prove it," he said simply. His voice was steady, but there was a fire in his words, a quiet determination that could not be ignored. "Together, we can build something greater than either of us could alone." Kale studied him for a long moment, his expression inscrutable. Then, with a slight nod, he returned to his throne, signaling the end of the meeting. As Adrian and Myra left the chamber, the weight of their victory settled over them. It was a fragile alliance, built on the thinnest threads of trust and understanding. But it was a start, a chance to reshape the galaxy, to forge a future where strength was measured not by conquest, but by unity. Outside the chamber, the Dominion's crystalline city stretched out before them, its towers gleaming in the light of 1,000 stars. Adrian paused, gazing out at the alien skyline, his thoughts heavy with the challenges that lay ahead. "This is only the beginning," he murmured, echoing Kale's words. Beside him, Myra nodded, her expression thoughtful. "But it's a beginning," she said softly. "And that's more than we've ever had before." Together, they walked into the unknown, carrying with them the hopes of humanity and the fragile promise of a new era.